Why is it so easy to make us lose control? What exactly is being touched inside us when someone hurts us? And what if I told you that your anger isn't really yours, it's theirs?
What irritates us in others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. Carl Jung. The truth is unsettling. Most of us live like emotional puppets. Someone pulls a string, a criticism, a rejection, a look of disdain, and suddenly we explode. We lose control, clarity, dignity, but the worst part isn't the explosion itself. The worst part is that we mistake it for strength. We live in an era where anger is seen as courage, where outbursts are confused with authenticity, where shouting is treated as having a voice. But something in that equation is deeply wrong. If your peace can be hijacked by any fool with a poisonous sentence, then who's really in control of your life? Carl Jung left us a warning, not as gentle advice, but as someone whispering a disturbing truth. Your anger is their weapon. Destroy it. This isn't a self-help manual, it's a mirror, a scalpel, a ritual of rupture. We're going to explore what Jung discovered about those who refused to be disturbed ever again. People who didn't react, who didn't take offense, who faced the rage of others like a passing wind. Not because they were cold, but because they had gone through a psychic metamorphosis, an inner transfiguration that made them untouchable. And that is exactly what you're about to learn here. The journey won't be comfortable, but no true liberation ever is. Imagine a cornered animal. Faced with threat, it growls, bites, thrashes. That anger is instinctive, a primitive defense mechanism. Now look around. How many humans do you know who live like that? Always on combat mode, ready to answer every slight with aggression. They call it a strong temperament. But what if it's just weakness in disguise? Carl Jung believed emotional reactivity is one of the clearest signs of psychic slavery. Those who react automatically are not choosing. They are obeying. They are being manipulated from within. Society, culture, even social media have learned to use anger as leverage. One click, one comment, one phrase, and you're there shouting at someone you don't even know, defending ideas you barely understand, bleeding over wounds that aren't even yours. Anger became currency, and you became emotional livestock. But Jung noticed something deeper and more disturbing. In his clinical practice, he met patients who simply didn't react. Insults, criticism, even betrayal, they didn't faze them. At first he thought they were dissociated, emotionally numb, but they weren't. They were lucid, present, conscious, simply untouchable. And that scared people. Why doesn't he flinch? Why doesn't she defend herself? Why does it seem like nothing hits him? These people weren't repressing emotions. They had reached a rare state of emotional impermeability. Anger for them was like a hook, and they had stopped biting the bait. Heinrich, the businessman Jung studied, was one of those cases. His account is telling, "Doctor, when someone insults me, time seems to slow down. The words hang in the air. And then I choose. I can let them pass through me, or I can hold them and make them part of me. Most of us don't even notice that gap. The insult lands, and anger explodes, like a dog trained to attack at the sound of a whistle. The problem? That whistle is not yours. We live in a world that feeds on and profits from our reactivity. Politicians use anger to win votes. Companies use it to sell promises. Influencers use it to get engagement. And we, emotional slaves, think we're strong because we're always at war. But there is a far greater power in calm. Because anger is predictable, serenity disarms. Heinrich was not feared for his fury. He was respected for his coldness. Not an inhuman coldness, but a discovery. The provocateur was nothing more than a mirror. And what that mirror reflected didn't need to be denied or hated. It needed to be understood. You are not here to learn to control your anger. You are here to destroy it, not by repression, but by awareness. Because the moment you stop reacting, the other loses power. The question that remains is this: are you willing to give up your identity as a reactive warrior to become something far more dangerous, someone no one can control anymore? There's a deeply unsettling moment in the life of anyone who begins to truly observe themselves. The moment you realize the problem isn't the other person, it never was. Picture a dark room, in the center a foggy mirror. Every time someone irritates you, you run to that mirror and shout, "Look what they made me feel." But the mirror stays still, and the only thing reflected there is you. Carl Jung called this the shadow mirror effect, According to him, every person who hurts you is revealing a part of yourself still living in the unconscious, a piece of you that you can't tolerate, and so you project it onto others. For Jung, the shadow isn't just the bad side of our personality. It's everything we don't want to admit we are. And every time you feel anger, you're standing before a reflection. The coworker who cuts you off in meetings, maybe he's mirroring your own desire to be heard, your insecurity, your unmet need for validation. The friend who always shows up late, maybe she's triggering your compulsive need for control, a trait you've dressed up as responsibility. Jung saw this dynamic in the case of Heinrich, the emotionally unshakable businessman. After a devastating betrayal in business, Heinrich didn't seek revenge. Instead, he asked himself a simple but brutal question. What is this betrayal trying to show me about myself? The answers? The partner's greed reflected his own hidden fear of falling back into poverty. The lie mirrored his own difficulty in expressing honest feelings, and the betrayal itself revealed his own capacity to betray if survival demanded it. Heinrich didn't become cold, he became transparent to himself, and once you truly see yourself, no one else can hurt you. Jung said anger is an arrow pointing inward, not outward, but most people would rather smash the mirror than face their own reflection. The pain we feel when someone provokes us is the pain of an old wound, maybe never healed, maybe inherited, an unconscious memory whispering, "You're not good enough. You have to prove yourself. You can't fail. You don't deserve rejection." And so, at the slightest criticism, we explode, not at the other person, but at the wounded child still living inside us. The child no one validated, no one embraced, the one who learned to fight before learning to breathe. Do you know why this is so terrifying? Because if the anger we feel is really about ourselves, then we are also responsible for the pain we keep feeding. But Jung saw this not as a sentence, but as an opportunity. He said, "What we do not face within ourselves, we will meet as fate." And the ignored shadow becomes the executioner we choose as partner, boss, or friend. That's why the second step in destroying anger is not to repress it. It's to listen, to ask, what part of me is hurting here? What is this person showing me, even without meaning to? Why does this, of all things, throw me off balance? When you begin to answer these questions, anger transforms. It stops being a monster and becomes a messenger of the soul. Jung called this the integration of the shadow, a process in which, instead of rejecting what disturbs us, we learn to embrace it, and by embracing it, we transcend it. But be warned, this path isn't clean. It isn't pretty. It isn't Instagram-worthy. Looking at your shadow is like opening an old door to the basement of your soul and going down alone, with a trembling candle in your hand. Down there you'll find masks, memories, traumas, impulses that shame you. But it's there, precisely there, that your power lies, because what is seen can be healed, and what is accepted no longer needs to be projected. When Heinrich integrated his shadow, something curious happened. People stopped trying to provoke him. As if, in the collective unconscious, they sensed that his surface no longer reflected anger, only clarity. And clarity is something manipulators cannot stand, because it exposes the game. So, the next time someone presses your wound, don't ask, "Why did they do this to me?" Ask instead, "What in me still allows this to hurt me?" That's the question that separates those who live in constant war from those who live in freedom. Imagine someone shoots an arrow at you. You see it coming, fast, sharp, precise. But for some reason you don't immediately understand, time slows down. You have 2 extra seconds, 2 seconds more than anyone else would have. And in those 2 seconds, you choose, do I let this arrow pierce me? Or do I let it pass without leaving a wound? This is the reaction gap, the space between stimulus and response that Carl Jung identified in his most emotionally immune patients. And what disturbed him most was this. Most people don't even know that space exists. We live like automatic machines, reacting to every word, every expression, every provocation. But Jung saw something different in Heinrich. He didn't react. He observed first. And in that space of observation lived freedom. Heinrich described this phenomenon to Jung with almost mystical precision. "Doctor, when someone insults me, I feel the words floating in the air. I can touch them, interpret them, or simply let them pass. It's as if I could choose whether or not they become real inside me. Most of us don't have that privilege. We live chained to the illusion that so-and-so made me angry, as if emotions were weapons fired from the outside in. But what if I told you that's a lie, that no one can make you angry? That what happens is you allow the emotion, not realizing you always had the option not to. That discovery changes everything. Jung called it the observer's protocol, the method by which anyone can train their mind to access that space between the strike and the response. The process is simple, but devastatingly transformative. Pause. When something provokes you, breathe. That's it. Break the automatic cycle. Observe, feel the emotion rising. Notice the other person, notice yourself. Become the spectator. Choose. Now you can act, not from impulse, but from your values. The difference between an ordinary person and someone psychologically free lies in this microscopic but decisive interval. Most people live on autopilot. They're insulted, they retaliate, they're criticized, they defend, they're ignored, they shout. Everything is reaction, nothing is choice. But Jung saw that true emotional maturity begins the moment you become the author of your response. And to do that, you must cultivate the gap. Maria, a teacher mentioned by Jung, suffered constant attacks from her principal. Before, she would go silent or cry alone after each meeting. But after learning the observer's protocol, something changed. She began to see his stress, the invisible pressures, the anger that wasn't hers. And for the first time, she could hear an attack without believing it was about her. "Doctor, I realized I was borrowing his pain. And it wasn't mine to carry. That awareness is revolutionary. When you start observing instead of reacting, something almost magical happens. The people who once manipulated you lose their map. They knew which buttons to press. They knew exactly how to throw you off balance. But now, you've shut off the panel. This doesn't mean becoming cold or indifferent. It means becoming radically conscious. You feel everything, but you no longer act from what you feel. You act from what you choose. That is the difference between a domesticated human and an awakened one, between the reactive and the sovereign. But here's a warning. Once you begin practicing the reaction gap, the world around you may resist. Your serenity will feel strange. Your lack of reaction will look like a threat. And yes, they will try to turn up the volume. They'll push harder. They'll test your calm as if they were facing something dangerous. And they are, because someone who no longer reacts can no longer be controlled. You start walking around with a kind of silence that unsettles, a kind of presence that disarms. It's not arrogance, it's clarity. Jung discovered that this clarity, this space between strike and response, is true emotional maturity. And more than that, it is the doorway to psychic alchemy. But before you can turn the lead of pain into the gold of awareness, you must stop identifying with everything you feel. You are not your anger. You are the one who observes the anger. You are not your fear. You are the awareness that breathes in spite of it. In the space between stimulus and response, you not only free yourself, you are reborn. There is a silent kind of strength that few know, and even fewer master. It's not the kind that yells the loudest, sets boundaries by screaming, or defends itself by striking first. It's the strength of someone who walks through the chaos of the world as if the world could no longer penetrate their inner walls. Carl Jung observed this kind of strength in patients who seemed unreachable, not because they were absent, but because they had learned to be present without absorbing. It was as if they had built invisible fortresses around their emotional state, psychic walls that didn't block people out, but filtered intentions, words, and judgments. This fortress is not built from coldness, but from discernment. It is constructed with the awareness that not everything that reaches you deserves space inside you, that not every criticism must become a wound, that not every look needs to be interpreted, that not every provocation deserves an answer. Jung came to see that most people live with their soul wide open, like a house without doors or windows, where anyone can walk in, throw insults, dump their emotional trash, and leave as if nothing happened. These are people who absorb everything: a colleague's stress, a mother's bitterness, a partner's insecurity, a boss's sarcasm. They live exhausted without realizing they are carrying emotions that were never theirs to begin with. But then he encountered different people, people who heard everything but only absorbed what made sense, who were criticized but didn't collapse, who were praised but didn't inflate, people who heard insults as if they were just the sound of a car passing by, external noise, not worthy of becoming internal. They weren't insensitive, they were selective. They had developed filters. They didn't let everything become a wound. They learned to identify what was theirs and what belonged to others: pain, frustration, projection. Heinrich, the businessman who so fascinated Jung, put it simply: People can only invade my peace if I forget that it belongs to me. Jung understood that this kind of fortress wasn't a technique, but a posture. It was a choice renewed every day, the choice not to internalize what doesn't belong to you. Before difficult meetings, these patients didn't armor up. They simply took a deep breath and made a pact with themselves. Today I observe, I don't absorb. When they faced predictable criticism, they already knew the tone, the content, the words, and they didn't need to react because they weren't caught off guard. They had already chosen how to respond, and that prior choice gave them the power to remain calm, without effort. But something deeper sustained this fortress, a sense of identity so rooted it could not be shaken by outside opinion. When you truly know who you are, the words of others become just that. Words, not sentences, not threats, just sounds that dissolve in the air, leaving no echo inside you. This kind of strength is unsettling, because when someone doesn't react as expected, the other is forced to face the mirror of their own impotence. Why doesn't he get angry? Why doesn't she fight back? Why won't this person give me what I want? The explosion, the drama, the conflict. And so, paradoxically, the calmer you become, the more provocation you attract. Jung studied this phenomenon closely. Emotionally solid people often become targets, not because of weakness, but because their serenity destabilizes the fragile. Your presence exposes their wounds. But true fortresses don't shut down in the face of this. They welcome, they understand, they don't get contaminated. They know the other person may be reacting to their own inner battles, not to what you did. And so, they take nothing personally, because they know that what others say reveals more about them than about you. David, an engineer who practiced this form of presence, told Jung that his boss became less aggressive after a few weeks, not because David confronted him, but because he stopped being vulnerable to the boss's emotional games. The boss shouted. David replied with clarity. The boss pressed. David stayed focused, until eventually the shouting lost its meaning and the pressure lost its effect. When you stop reacting, people change, and if they don't, you change the way you relate to them, without guilt, without anger, without drama. Jung often reminded his patients, this strength is not meant to pull you away from the world. It is meant to allow you to remain in it, without being lost in it. It's about being with others without dissolving into their pain. It's about being empathetic without carrying what isn't yours. It's about being firm without being cruel. It's about being whole among fragmented people. And that, perhaps, is the greatest challenge of all. To remain human even after you've learned how not to be hurt. Because the temptation of superiority is real. When you become emotionally immune, you might start to see others as unruly children, and distance yourself, not out of protection, but out of arrogance. But Jung insisted, a true fortress does not isolate. It sustains. It is when you can be a refuge without being a sponge, a presence without absorption, an ear without echo. And when that happens, something profound changes. You realize you no longer need to defend yourself, because no one can invade you anymore. Some people learn not to react, others go further. They turn every provocation into fuel, every criticism into a map, every confrontation into a mirror. Carl Jung called this emotional alchemy, an inner process where pain becomes wisdom, offense becomes insight, and weakness becomes strength. Heinrich, the businessman who inspired so many of Jung's private writings, once said something that captures this elevated state of consciousness. I stopped seeing difficult people as enemies. Now they're my teachers. Most of us try to avoid toxic people. Heinrich did the opposite. He moved closer, not out of masochism, but because he realized that the more someone affects you, the more they reveal about you. The anger you feel towards someone is never really about them. It's about something in you that has yet to be healed, integrated, accepted. That's why emotional alchemy begins with a shift in the question. No longer, why is this happening to me? But instead, what is this trying to show me about myself? When someone criticizes, betrays, or provokes you, you can respond with pain, or you can ask yourself, what part of me is being touched? What old wound is this opening? What weakness is being exposed so I can strengthen it? That's the turning point. It's when the other's attack stops being ammunition and becomes a refining mirror. Jung observed patients who reached this stage. He described them as impossible to manipulate, because no matter what others said, did, or projected, they had already claimed their shadow. Nothing surprised them anymore. And for that reason, nothing controlled them. Lisa, a designer Jung worked with, was once accused by a client of being amateur and unprofessional. Before she would have cried, shrunk back, or snapped in anger. But this time she did something different. She asked herself, what is he saying about himself without realizing it? Why did his opinion echo so loudly inside me? Is there something in my own professional insecurity that I still need to face? And then it clicked. The client was projecting his own fear of being exposed as a fraud. His pain wasn't about her work. It was about him. At that moment, her anger evaporated. She responded firmly, corrected what needed to be corrected. But above all, she kept her peace. That is alchemy, turning attack into data, criticism into reflection, poison into gold. But Jung warned, there's a danger in this process. Some people, once they become emotionally untouchable, drift away from their own humanity. They begin to see others as wounded children, as emotional puppets trapped in their unresolved traumas, and slowly they become cold observers, almost indifferent. Even Heinrich admitted, "Doctor, sometimes I feel like I'm only studying people," as if every interaction were a psychological experiment, not a human encounter. That is the risk of self-knowledge. It can become distance, as if by understanding too much you stop feeling with others. But Jung insisted, the goal of emotional alchemy is not to become stone, it is to become fire, the kind of fire that warms and not burns, that illuminates and without blinding. At its highest stage, the psychological warrior becomes a compassionate warrior, someone who remains in peace without ceasing to care, someone who can hear the pain of others without absorbing it, who can stand in chaos and still be a refuge. Heinrich reached that point. His wife, who once feared his coldness, began to see something else. She realized he wasn't indifferent. He was present in a rare way, without judgment, without the urge to fix, without the pressure to react. She could express anger, sadness, insecurity, and he stayed, steady, calm, loving, not carrying her weight, but also not abandoning her. This is the highest point of the journey. It's not about becoming untouchable, it's about becoming so whole that nothing can fragment you, so lucid that your very presence begins to heal others. Emotional alchemy has 3 movements, subtle but powerful. First, you extract meaning from discomfort. Then you integrate what you had been denying. Finally, you transform that new understanding into practical strength. Every provocation becomes a tool, every crisis a laboratory, every difficult person a disguised messenger. And for the first time in your life, you stop running from pain, because you understand that it is pain itself that points the way to freedom. What once was a reason to fight now becomes material for growth, and that makes you dangerous, not because you threaten, but because nothing can threaten you anymore. Perhaps anger was never really yours. Perhaps it was inherited, learned, absorbed. Perhaps it was just an improvised armor you wore to survive in a world that never taught you how to defend yourself with awareness. But now you've seen another possibility. You've seen the space between the strike and the response. You've seen the mirror where you once saw only enemies. You've seen silent fortresses made not of walls but of identity. And you've seen an alchemy that can turn offenses into evolution. You no longer have to react the way you always did. You no longer have to bleed where you always bled. You no longer have to hand your emotional center to people who don't know what to do with it. Carl Jung didn't leave us formulas. He left us open doors to the unknown living within us. And perhaps the most disturbing, and also most liberating, realization is this. The person who causes you the most pain is the same one who holds the keys to your healing, you. And maybe today you've started to feel that. I remember a specific moment in my life, not that long ago, when I completely lost control over a provocation, words tossed into the air by someone who was no longer part of my story, but who somehow knew exactly where to hit. And they hit. That night, after the argument, I sat in silence. But it wasn't an ordinary silence, it was dense, as if something inside me had died. Not the anger, but the desire to keep reacting like that forever. It was in that hole that I found Jung. Not in a book, not in a class, but in that desperate feeling that I didn't want to be the same person anymore. Maybe you're at that point now, tired of handing your soul to anyone who knows how to provoke you, tired of being predictable even to the people who hate you, tired of losing yourself every time the world screams. If you made it this far, breathe. Seriously, breathe now. You're not alone. You're waking up, and waking up hurts, but it's better than remaining on the autopilot of anger. Thank you for trusting me this far, not as a guru, master, or coach, but as someone who, like you, is just trying not to go mad in a world that profits from our loss of control. If this video moved you, hit like now. Yeah, I know. It feels superficial to press a little button after diving into the abyss of the human psyche, but the algorithm has no soul, so we have to poke it too. Comment below. What trigger hit you hardest in this video? Yes, I read them. And yes, I'll probably understand you better than your ex did. And if you haven't subscribed yet, friend, what more do I need to show you? Do you want me to come to your house, draw an archetype on the wall, and speak in Jung's voice? Subscribe. Seriously, it'll hurt less than your next emotional showdown with your unconscious. And to finish, 2 videos are appearing on the screen right now. I can't tell you the topics, but one of them will hit a blind spot you don't even know you have, and the other, well, let's say you won't be able to pretend you didn't understand it. Choose carefully, or better, let your unconscious choose for you. I'll see you on the next crossing.